Welcome to LinkedIn Learning Office Hours. I'm Drew Boyd. Really glad to have you and seeing a lot of familiar as well as some new names out on the comments. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am very pleased to introduce the author of this book called Big Picture Strategy: The Six Choices That Will Transform Your Business. The author is Dr. Marta Dapena Barón, and I'm going to have her tell you a little bit about herself in a minute. But you should know that I've known Marta a very long time. We're actually old friends, we're colleagues, we're collaborators. Marta and I have done many programs around the world. And I am really pleased today because, today you're going to get to know Marta and learn about her evolution and how this model has developed and what she's done to make this what I think is absolutely the best marketing framework out there. And I want you to feel free to post comments and questions. If you have a question, if you remember the to put a Q and a colon in front of it, that will help us a lot. And without further ado, I'm going to get Marta on here. And so, welcome, Marta.
Hello, Drew. How are
How
you?
are you? Good, good.
Great.
So, Marta, you heard the intro. I talk glowingly about this framework and how much I think of it. And as you know, in both of our careers, we've seen a lot of marketing frameworks come and go. Tell the audience a little bit about you and how did ultimately lead to this project, to this book project, The Big Picture.
Sure. So I started my career at McKinsey and Company as a consultant. And of course, at McKinsey, they sell strategy projects. So that's what I did. I worked on strategy projects. And later on, I went and worked at ABN AMRO Bank for 8 years. Worked privatizing airports and gas distribution systems, and eventually also getting a strategy job as the director of strategy for the North American Bank, reporting to the CEO. And after that, went on to GE, where I was vice president of marketing, again doing strategy and marketing. And what I realized over the years is that most of the work I was doing was wasted. We would develop strategic plans, we worked really hard on them, and then they would go in a drawer and nobody ever looked at them. And I was incredibly frustrated, feeling as though my work was not being used. And so joined a professor from Northwestern, Kellogg School of Business, and we developed what we thought was going to fix the problem. So we developed the big picture framework, and we started initially working with small companies to just test it out. Out of all places, I went to work in Panama. I figured it's a small enough country that if the framework was a disaster, I could just, what happens in Panama stays in Panama. I could just go back and get a regular job, and that would be that. But to my surprise, the framework did great. And not only did we implement it successfully in some Panamanian companies, but GE called me back and asked me to teach at Crotonville. We did that, and then J&J and a variety of other companies. So eventually we wrote a book published in 2014 by Wiley. It's a textbook, Marketing Management, the Big Picture, which we taught at the University of Michigan. I also taught it at Cornell. It's being taught other places. And we implemented it with companies. Now, that book is great, but it's a textbook, right? And
Yeah.
so big picture strategy is really kind of the next generation, the natural evolution of that framework. It seeks to simplify the big picture framework. And our hope, of course, is that it will bring it to a much wider audience.
That's great. And as I look at the comments and people signing in, I want to welcome a lot of my students as well as students from around the world and LinkedIn connections, as well as people from LinkedIn Learning. Good to see you here. And Marta, I also know that you have some corporate clients that are here that are live streaming this out to their groups. That's pretty exciting. But there are some new people here, undoubtedly. Tell tell us what is the big picture? How do you describe it to somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the big picture to me is the solution to what has ailed marketing for so many years, right? So, if you pick up the Kotler book, which is by far the book taught in MBA programs around the
Yeah.
world, it weighs 13 pounds. It has 1,000 pages, and if it doesn't literally put you to sleep because you're, it's so boring, you can read it in bed and it'll knock you out, right? So people go to an MBA program, they feel as though they know marketing, but really they can't really recall their marketing knowledge when faced with a problem. So Big Picture really seeks to integrate the strategy, the big decisions that you make as to who we are as an organization. And really, customers don't care who you are, they care how you present yourself, your brand. So, who are you from a brand architecture perspective? Who is your customer? And what business category you're in. So, these big strategy decisions are used to develop a value proposition for the brand, and then that value proposition drives execution. So other frameworks out there are, again, either a list of items or there are a bunch of boxes. But Big Picture actually seeks to integrate these decisions because in the real world, right, the world is a system, the company is a system, and decisions that you make about your brand or about your pricing are going to affect all kinds of other aspects of your go-to-market strategy. So Big Picture is all about connecting the dots of strategy and execution. Now, people think strategy is really complicated, but actually, when you think about it, there are just four go to market strategies. So,
Yeah.
strategy requires choice. And what we noticed in organizations is that leaders have lots of disincentives to choice. So, when you stand up in front of a group and you advocate for a particular course of action, it's clear what you're giving up. But actually, what you're getting is uncertain, it's in the future,
Yep.
and so what people end up doing is they end up with 20 must wins. So 20 things that the commercial team needs to get done. And of course, that's impossible, right? So we're set up for failure when we're trying to do too many things. So the idea of the framework is there are just four go-to-market strategies. And in order to choose one of them, you've got 6 variables, right? You need to think about your brand. You need to think about the bodies, really important, right? Who are your customers?
Yep.
You need to think about your business category, delineate that really clearly, because that determines your go-to-market opportunity and that determines your competitive strategy. And then you need to think about the beliefs that you're trying to change in those customers, and therefore, what is your value proposition? You need to think about behaviors. So, what are you trying to get people to do that's different from what they're doing today? And lastly, of course, you need to set up a metric system so you can learn the benchmark. So, 6 interdependent variables, 4 go to market strategies, but they're connected.
And that's the key. I think the thing I liked about the model when I first learned it during my tenure at Johnson and Johnson was the linkages, right?
Right.
And how many times have you heard me tell the story about marketing students or corporations? They create marketing plans with great strategy and great tactics. The problem is they have nothing to do with each other. There's no
Right.
linkage, and you've broken this down to a point where those linkages have to happen. And I think it's one of the major strengths. Checking out the comments here. If you have a question for Marta, just pop it into the comments. We're both monitoring those. If you wouldn't mind, just put a Q in front if you remember and a colon, and then give us your question. Marta, writing a book is a lot of work.
Yes.
As you know and I know, it's not our first rodeo. What was the what's the most fun you had with this particular project, or what part of it do you like the most?
To me, it's just really refining the logic of a framework that I knew worked. But some of the terminology we were using, and again, the format of that textbook, I think was getting in the way of engaging a wider audience. So it's refining the logic, simplifying
Yeah.
the logic. And one of the things the new book does is it brings the 4 strategies forward. So the way that we think about strategy is not, something that gets developed in a dark wood panel room as we did at McKinsey, and that people end up paying millions of dollars as a consulting project to obtain. But really, strategy is about figuring out what group of customers you want to go after and devising a plan to change their behaviors by changing their beliefs. So bringing those four strategies forward in the book and the framework, I think, was really key to engaging people to think about strategy in a totally different way. Yes, it's complex, but ultimately they're just four go-to-market strategies. The other thing I had fun doing was really writing about one of my favorite brands of the pandemic, Peloton. So something that happened to me during the pandemic was that I found myself riding my bicycle outside or riding the Peloton indoors. And if you read the new book, unfortunately, Peloton stock now is not doing so well. But it was really fun to bring my personal interest in that brand into the book, and just in general, coming up and refreshing all the examples that we know apply to this strategy archetype.
And we do have a question popping up here about the reference to Peloton. And what is your take on what's currently going on with the company? The layoffs, the
Yes.
CEO stepping down. I mean, it was a dramatic turnabout. Talk about it from a big picture point of view. What happened, do you think? And what is their potential workout? How do they go? How do they go forward?
Right. I mean, I think in some ways, Peloton communicated communicate expectations that the brand really couldn't meet in terms of their target market. So, how many millions of users can they really get on the platform? What they've done with pricing, it seems, pricing is really interesting, right? It drives immediate revenue, but it can certainly lead you down a path of brand destruction, brand value destruction. So I think that they've overextended themselves. And then there were some unfortunate mishaps, be it Christmas, over a year ago when they had that commercial that really misrepresented who their target audience was. They got a lot of negative publicity around that. I think it's still a strong brand, and I'm hopeful that the new CEO will stick to the core. The core model that really drives their loyalty. They have incredibly loyal customers still,
Yeah.
99% retention rates, and incredibly heart loyal customer base.
Marta, we have a question here in the comments from Daniel Strang. He,
Yeah.
he he makes a comment about the real win. The key win in big picture is that it helps stakeholders better understand and limit their focus, their risk
Right.
and anxiety, and shift them into manageable frames. Give us some examples of what you've seen in the corporate world, use cases, you might say, or examples. Tell us what's going on out there with big
In
picture.
terms of the framework.
Yep. Who's using it? How
Yeah,
are they? Well,
absolutely.
you probably can't name specific names, but if you give us some examples of companies, what they've done with it, what's the typical model of what happens when a company starts adopting the big picture framework?
Right. So the framework is really all about lifting the commercial competency of the organization. And although marketers have been talking about how important customers are since the 1960s, most business to business and technology driven organizations are still managing to maximize product margin. The framework really changes that, but it does require commitment, right? So
Yeah.
the way that we normally work with companies is to engage, if we can, the leadership team, and get them to really embrace that questions like who are we as an organization need to be driven from the top, and then need to be bubbling up from the bottom of the organization as well. So, who are we? What does our brand stand for? What kind of culture do we need to create that reflects that brand and its values? And then, what business are we in? And then, exactly as Daniel was saying, when you know who you are and then you know what core competencies you have and what strategic assets you have, it really that core competence knowledge becomes a filter through which you look at the world. So you no longer have the anxiety of I need to fill white space or go fill out and discover blue
Yeah.
oceans, but you really focus on what you're good at, and build from a place of strength.
So I want to bring up a question up here on the comments. It's from Adam Tiffany, and he says, "Can you discuss the framework?" What I like about it is that he is a an engineer, and why would an engineer? I mean, Adam, it's great to have you, but how can engineers, how can non-marketers benefit from the big picture?
So the big picture is a method that anyone, any organization who serves clients, be it a nonprofit, a for-profit, business to consumer, can use to organize how they go to market. Um, so the idea of the big picture is it's a systems-based idea. So it's moving away from marketing or strategy as either something that's too complex for people who are not MBAs to know, or it's not integrated, so it's kind of hard to execute on. To move from that to understanding that A, this is all common sense, but B, in organizations, common sense gets lost because people live in a bunch of silos. So the idea of the big picture framework, again, it's bringing down the kind of the strategy house to something that anyone can understand. Questions like who are we, what are we good at, where are we going, what business are we in, the choice of what business you are in, it's what we call the category choice, is tremendously important. And people who, a lot of people even in strategy don't think about this very much. So if I am launching a sugar, additive or sugar substitute, is it an artificial sweetener? Is it a natural sweetener? Is it something else? If I'm launching a car, say I'm Tesla, am I launching an all electric car? Am I launching a performance vehicle? Am I launching something in the middle? So, this question of a category creation determines how people view your brand, choose the company that you want to keep, your competition. And then obviously then determines what customers are going to expect from you. So you start with those choices. So who are we? Who is our customer? What business category are we in? And then you think carefully as to whose data do we actually need? Whose insights? Nowadays, through social listening and digital, we have access to tons and tons of data, but without a really good hypothesis as to whose data we actually want and for what purpose. I find that people are getting lost in the weeds. Um, so that's so you progress through these questions,
Yep.
beliefs, and then you move into execution. And execution is really all around aligning our engineering team and the rest of the organization with the marketing strategy. And by marketing, I don't mean the marketing team is putting together the strategy, but it's really the go-to-market strategy.
Good. Okay, another question here from Paul Moran. Paul, I'm going to put your question on the screen. What has been the biggest challenge for organizations when trying to implement the big picture strategy? Any common themes to overcome when trying to get buy-in? Boy, have we
Yeah.
have we run across that a lot.
Yes. I think one of the themes is sort of FOMO, framework FOMO, right?
Yeah.
So there are a variety of frameworks out there, whether it's Lean Startup or Blue Strategy or business model canvas or et cetera, et cetera. So every 4 steps to the epiphany. So every year you're going to be seeing a variety of management books coming out, each spousing something that's relatively similar, but with a slightly different bend. I think any framework, in a sense, can be useful, but trying to adopt all these frameworks, it really does mean that you're trying to bring a variety of languages to your house. It's impossible to communicate that way. So I would say one of the challenges is getting people to adopt not templates. I know that people feel as though perhaps the way to get everyone aligned is to get everyone to fill out a template. So it's not the template that's important in my mind, but it's committing to certain tools that everyone in the organization uses, and they use the same vocabulary around those tools as well. marketing has it's an interesting discipline, right? Because it has the kind of the rare characteristic of having 10 definitions for the same word. So if I talk to you about segmentation and I talk to another marketer about segmentation, they actually often understand different things. So getting people to align behind the framework, getting leadership to focus on marketing issues and customer issues. I think that's a hurdle to overcome. As a marketer, I would say that the best way to approach that is to be a really, really good communicator using something like the big picture framework, of course,
Yeah.
to become a very logical communicator.
So here's a comment from one of my students. Sorry, these are sort of in the way here, but if you read this from one of my students, Jonathan Gabby. Jonathan, thanks for joining us and thanks for your comment. He says, I love how the framework assesses the strengths of the business and immediately leads with the strength. And he, of course, I think he's referring to our good old friend, the core idea of core competence. Talk a little bit about core competence and how central that is to how marketers think about what they're going to do in the marketplace.
Right. So core competence is one of those most hated business terms of all time, right? Like if you type it in Google, you get like a billion hits.
That
And
is so true.
people talk about core competence the way I think sometimes people talk about mission and vision. So words that are really overused, taglines. I put them on my conference room, but do I ever think about it? Core competence really, to me, it represents the investment objectives of the organization, right? So
Yeah.
in kind of human resources, the mirror image of core competence is sort of the strengths finder that Gallup made so popular a few years back. So the idea is figure out what you're good at, invest in that because you'll find efficiency in investing in things where you already outpace your competitors. So the way we think about core competence, it's always in the context of competitive analysis, but it's also in the context of customer value. We don't develop skills just for our own profitability, short-term profitability, or for our own, entertainment. We develop skills to develop value for customers. And when you think about it that way, you realize that core competence is this internal kind of construct that it has meaning once you connect it to the brand, right? So the brand being why people choose you, it's a unit of choice in a sense in the market. But the meaning of a brand needs to absolutely be connected to the core competence. When companies go away
Yeah.
from that, they lose their way. When companies stick to that, I think they find great success and sustainability.
Question here from a gentleman named Adil Marzouk. Adil, nice to see you here. For companies with a customer centric culture, how can they drive their go to market effectively using your model?
So if they have a customer centric culture, I think they're in a great place
Yeah.
to use the model. The model, though, what it does is it provides a common language for everyone in the organization to communicate about customers. So if you are working in a global organization and you have multiple business divisions, so it's relatively diverse, it's highly likely that people in different geographies and different business units are actually using different methodologies. The big picture has the power of bringing people together to enable learning from these diverse groups. And that's how our clients are using it, right? So whether you look at large medical device company A or diversified, conglomerate company B, or business to consumer aesthetics company C, they're using the framework to bring people together and to enable learning through successive strategies through execution plans.
Good question here from Jordan Novak. Jordan says, can you discuss how a company's big picture strategy can change over time and the process of shifting into different quadrants over time? You talked about the four go to market. I think what he's talking about, when do you know it's time to change and
Yeah,
what does that
absolutely.
look like?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So there are four go-to-market strategies. Let's just name them, right? So you can, if you have an incredible innovation, go to market and create a new business category. So get people to look at the world differently. That's what you're doing. Category creation, strategy number one. Now, you've been incredibly successful, and that category has flourished, is doing fantastically well. What's going to happen, of course? You're going to get competitors coming in, right? And so when you get competitors coming in, you maybe should shift strategies. How do you know when it's time to shift strategies? Go back to those 6 variables that I mentioned before. So my brand, my customers or the bodies, right? My business category size and competitive rivalry within it. Then the value proposition, so the beliefs. How important is my value proposition today versus what it was when I created this category? Am I doing great? And how am I perceived on performing on it? Beliefs, behaviors. Am I still getting a lot of new customers into the category, or is that flow of customer acquisition starting to slow down? And then benchmarks. Benchmarks is basically how am I doing on the executional pieces of the framework. So you have your metrics dashboard around those 6 Bs. And you would then, the dashboard itself would then tell you when it's time to pivot to another strategy. It is natural that if you started in category creation, you will move to brand expansion, which is kind of our number 2 quadrant, right? So in brand expansion, you've got a ton of loyal customers. You still are the category leader. And in fact, that competition has come in, but you're comfortable that you're still ahead of them. There are 2 other strategies, of course. I'll go ahead and name them. Brand commitment. So you may be in a position where you created the category, you are not able to hold on to loyal customers. You now are fighting for share. Even though you have a lot of retained customers, you're fighting for share. That's brand commitment. You have a lot of multi-brand customers, what we call them. And then there's a 4th strategy, which is brand switching. But anyway, short answer is that you have your 6 variables, you've got your 4 strategies. You basically would set up metrics around those 6 Bs to know when to pivot from one to the other.
Question from Alex. Alex says, can Marta talk about the measurements the teams can put in place to see if big picture plan is working? And Alex is getting a little greedy here. He has a follow-up question. Thanks, Alex. I'm just kidding. How long should you work the plan before making any alterations or tweaks?
Yes. So I would love to never change my strategy, first of all, right? Like, it would be great if I had just one strategy and it worked forever. That is perhaps unlikely, right? But yeah, the measurements that you put in place are just those 6 Bs. So, right. So what's the level of my brand preference and brand value? How am I doing with my body? So what are my customer acquisition and retention metrics? What is my customer lifetime value? Am I happy with it? Am I seeing kind of return on my customer investments? Then you would think about your business category. What is the health of my business category? Much more of a concern if I'm the category leader than if I'm in one of those 2 share fighting quadrants, brand commitment or brand switching. And then obviously the behavioral metrics. Am I seeing the customer behaviors I want to see? And what do I need to tweak in my marketing 4P? So the products, the pricing, the communications, and the distribution channels to get there. So you would want to be setting those metrics, and then in benchmarks we have other kind of operational metrics. When is it time to pivot? Again, the metrics will tell you, and it's really not a question of time as much as it's a question of the health of your plan relative to the investment that you are making.
Well, what do we have here? This is Tom Knox. Tom asks, we have adopted the blue ocean strategy, but it seems to have exhausted its meaning. The big picture strategy appears to cover a larger set of variables that would be more valuable than the blue ocean.
I could not agree more. And that may surprise you. I'm just kidding. Yes. So it's interesting. Back in my banking days, actually, when I had that strategy job, we did do some work with Chan Kim, the author of Blue Strategy. I thought his model was good. It's a good model. I think what's missing is the comprehensiveness, as you're saying, of the framework. When we designed the big picture framework, our intent really was to provide a common language for the organization. Now, with that in mind, the framework is comprehensive. So it goes from, who are we, which is almost like the most foundational, most basic
Sure.
question, but hard question you can ask
Hmm.
yourself, to what should be the number of impressions I have on my on my website or my webinar or whatever. So it's incredibly comprehensive, but it's still simple, and it brings together strategy and execution, as I mentioned. So if I have defined my business category to be relatively broad, what does that mean relative to my competitive strategy? And if my competitive strategy is one of earning share, what does that mean relative to the products and services I need to develop, my pricing, etc.? The framework will give you, in fact, the way the framework works is asks you questions about these things. And you'll find that using the logic of the framework, just follow that process, you'll come up with pretty good answers, I would say. So I agree. I think you should absolutely move over to big picture.
So, Marta, I mentioned that I have a number of students on the live stream today, which is great.
Yes.
I'm also teaching this right now, big picture, at the Lindner College of Business at the University of Cincinnati. Tell us about what's in it for students. A student that learns this, no matter what walk of life, finance, IT, innovation. What's the big picture in graduate school going to do for them?
I think the big picture is going to help you think logically. No matter what you end up doing in life, you want to be a logical thinker. You can't be a great communicator without being a logical thinker. And I think you can't be super successful in life if you're not a great communicator. So I would say, dig deep into this because it will help you think logically. It's a model that you don't have to share with others. You've learned it, but it will help you appear as though you're a very sophisticated. Um, I was going to say student. You're a very sophisticated thinker over time. So I think I could say much more, but I'm just going to say it's going to help you think very logically. When I took other classes, obviously I went back and got my doctorate. I've taken a bunch of classes, and I can tell you that it is the classes that you write lists for. You'll never forget the mnemonics and the lists. The classes that teach you how to think, those are the classes that I think you'll carry with you forever. That's certainly what Drew's class, I'm sure, does. That's what the framework and the book are really attempting to do.
Speaking of students and clients alike, tell us about the tools that you're making available for those who want to go beyond reading the book and implementing the techniques. What's available to them, Marta?
Sure. So we have obviously workshops. You can bring us on site. So that's generally for companies more than individuals. We have simulations. Most recently, we created one with Harvard Business School just 2 years ago. And the idea of simulations, they're serious games, right? So the idea of the simulations is to elucidate these principles in a realistic but still risk-free environment. We have simulations. We have online courses as well. And just coming out, we have the Big Picture Field Book just coming out on Kindle, also will be available through our website. And the Field Book itself is replete with examples and an explanation of how to put these tools into practice.
Okay, question here from Adil again. He asks, how has the role of CMOs evolved in the last 20 months, especially during the post-COVID area? What are the lessons learned from marketing through a pandemic and the likes of which we haven't seen before? Boy, great question.
I think that the role of the CMO has evolved from branding to strategy. I think back in the '90s, when I was still at McKinsey, strategy was something that maybe there would be a few people or a group of people or sometimes consultants did for the organization. So it felt like it was sort of an add-on to the functions of the organization. Sometimes, part of the corporate function. The CMO now, I think, needs to own the strategy. So I think CMOs are moving into strategy. The other thing that's happening, I think, is a move towards brand authenticity. Through the pandemic, I think, I think that the pandemic has humbled a lot of companies, a lot of us. And I think there's an appreciation, not just the pandemic itself, but things like Blue Lives Matter, a huge drive towards diversity and inclusion. There is a need in the market and there's a need in the world for certainly more sustainable practices in business and marketing. And what that means for the CMO is there's a need to really show up as an authentic brand. And more than ever, that means really understanding what your organization is made out of. I mean, the other thing has happened over the last decade or so is tremendous consolidation in all of our markets. So if you're drinking a beer, it's from one of two companies. If you are, if you carry a credit card, it's from one of three companies. If you're flying in the US, it's from one of four airlines, right? So if you're going to get surgery, it's going to be from one of four companies that your implants are made from. So incredible consolidation. And again, that's putting pressure on that CMO to differentiate brands. But it's really difficult, right? Because what you're finding is the technology isn't enough. All three or four brands that are in your industry have access to the same technology, the same people. So what's the difference? The difference ought to live within the processes and the culture of the company, and it needs to be reflected in the practices of the organization towards customers. So really getting very clear on what the brand is about in an authentic manner, and then displaying that through customer journeys, real customer journeys, right? Really experientially designed.
So, Marta, what's your next project? Do you have anything on the list? What's next?
Hopefully translating the book to Japanese,
Oh, good.
not
Okay,
myself, to Spanish, yes, myself. So taking the framework still to other languages, that's definitely next in the agenda. And then hopefully getting more active on LinkedIn through LinkedIn Learning.
great. I'd love to see that too. One last question. Adam asked, do you imagine top of mind awareness is lost more quickly than, say, 30 years ago? Less or so? What do you think about top
Uh,
of mind awareness? A big,
Yeah,
big
I
issue.
think the market is ever more crowded, and that behooves all of us to really be incredibly consistent in our messaging. So yes, I would agree that our not only because people are less focused, but just because the market is incredibly crowded, getting to top of mind awareness is harder. But yes, it's a lot. Yeah, so it's a lot harder. And what that means, just for the average marketer, what it means is you can't be changing your value proposition every 2 minutes. You've got to define a value proposition that has staying power, and you've got to be able to deliver on it. So it's not just what we say, but obviously people remember what we do.
Marta, where can people get the book?
Amazon.com,
Of course.
Wiley, and where books are
and
sold.
and Wiley. Very good. Marta, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you not only tell us about yourself, but also about what's coming and about this wonderful framework called The Big Picture and your new book. Be good. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, everyone.
So, thank you very much for your engagement. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. It's always fun to hear about how this model has evolved and see how it's being taken into market. So, last couple comments here. Just be sure to check into my podcast. Love to see you listen to that. We have a podcast come out every Monday. And also be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, follow or connect. I'm happy to do either. And also, next week at my regular time, we'll be covering careers in healthcare marketing and sales. with my good friend Doug Ladd, who is amazing, has had just a wonderful career in the healthcare space, and he's going to tell you all about the things that he is up to as well. So I hope you can join us. That's back at the regular time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, next Tuesday, March 1st. Thank you very much.